Welcome back to the Explainer. If you are a focused learner trying to untangle the incredibly complex web of U.S. state privacy laws, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're taking what honestly looks like a totally chaotic patchwork of regulations, and we're going to distill it into a clear, actionable playbook for you.
Okay, let's dive into this. For decades now, privacy advocates have been pushing hard for a unified federal privacy law in the United States, kind of like the GDPR over in Europe. But without any federal action, states just started taking matters into their own hands, and it all really started with a familiar saying: as California goes, so goes the nation. California absolutely led the charge by enacting the first comprehensive state privacy law, and in doing so, they set off a massive domino effect all across the country.
50. Just think about that number for a second. Back in 2003, California was the first state to enact a data breach notification law. Fast forward to today, all 50 states have one. Experts and commentators are pretty convinced we're watching that exact same history repeat itself right now with comprehensive data privacy. We're rapidly heading toward this complex 50-state patchwork of regulations that businesses somehow have to navigate.
So, here is our compliance blueprint for today. First, the privacy patchwork. Second, who actually has to comply. Third, core business obligations. Then risk assessments, data security, and finally, the cost of non-compliance.
Section 1. The State Privacy Patchwork. Let's look at the state of U.S. privacy.
So before we can really navigate the rules, we kind of need to understand how we got here. Back in 2018, the European Union's GDPR went into effect. And that very same year, California enacted the California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA. They followed that up with an even stricter amendment, the CPRA, which took effect on January 1st, 2023. But California wasn't alone for long. By 2023, the idea had spread like wildfire, and 4 other states rolled out their own active comprehensive privacy laws: Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, and Virginia.
Moving to Section 2, who must actually comply? Defining what a business is.
Now, if you're a business leader or a compliance officer, this right here is your very first hurdle. You need to know if your organization even falls under the definition of a regulated business. What's really interesting is how applicability just varies wildly from state to state. In California, your size alone can pull you in. If your company does business there and has a gross revenue of at least $25 million, bam, you have to comply. Doesn't matter what kind of business you run. But then, look at Colorado, Connecticut, and Virginia. They completely drop that blanket revenue threshold. Instead, they rely heavily on the volume of data you process. Specifically, if you process the data of at least 100,000 consumers in their state, you're on the hook. And the differences don't stop there. California and Utah actually sit on complete opposite ends of the compliance spectrum. California casts the widest net by far. It regulates the selling of data, which it defines incredibly broadly as any exchange for value, not just cash, and the sharing of data, which includes stuff like cross-context behavioral advertising. On the completely opposite end, Utah takes a much narrower, way more business-friendly approach. Utah only regulates selling and restricts that definition solely to transactions involving actual monetary compensation. Section 3. The core business obligations. Laying out the core rules. Okay, if the headache of figuring out who applies has you stressed, here comes some interoperability relief. Because while they all have their distinct quirks, these state laws largely share a common DNA when it comes to what businesses actually have to do. Welcome to what we can call the Rule of 5. These are the absolute core obligations that businesses can use as a universal playbook. 1. You need robust notice and transparency requirements. We're talking clear privacy policies and easy opt-out links. 2. You have to enforce an opt-in default for children's data. 3. You must establish purpose and processing limitations, meaning you only collect what's necessary and proportionate. 4. You must conduct formal risk assessments. And 5. You must maintain strict data security requirements.
But you know there's always a catch, right? Subtle nuances still exist within those core obligations. Take the rule for children's data. California requires businesses to get explicit opt-in consent to sell or share the data of consumers under the age of 16. But Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, and Virginia actually set that threshold a bit lower, requiring opt-in consent for consumers under 13, which ties a bit closer to the federal CIPP US standards. So, the broad framework is the same, but the operational details, those require some real attention.
Section 4. Spotlight on risk assessments. Evaluating the data.
Let's do a deep dive into one of the most resource-intensive hurdles these laws mandate. What exactly is a risk assessment? Well, it's a formal evaluation that businesses are legally obligated to conduct for any data processing activities that present a heightened risk of harm to a consumer. This isn't just a casual internal meeting. It is documented proof that your business has weighed the risks of processing personal data against the benefits and has taken steps to mitigate any potential harms. But what actually counts as a heightened risk?
So, the crucial point is knowing exactly what triggers this requirement. 4 out of the 5 states we're discussing today mandate these assessments if you do any of the following: process personal data for targeted advertising, sell personal data, process sensitive data like health conditions or precise geolocation, or profile consumers in ways that could have a significant impact. If your business is doing any of these things, formally documenting your risk isn't just a best practice anymore, it is literally the law.
Section 5. Mandating data security. Guarding the data. Now our operational spotlight shifts from evaluating the data to actively guarding it. Because across all 5 states, the legislation universally demands this exact legal standard. Businesses must implement and maintain reasonable administrative, technical, and physical data security practices. This is designed to protect both the confidentiality and the integrity of consumer data. Look, it's one thing to have a beautifully written privacy policy, but it means absolutely nothing if the data itself is left wide open. In practice, this means cybersecurity can no longer be an afterthought. It's a core mandated legal obligation. If a breach happens and your security practices weren't deemed reasonable, you aren't just dealing with a PR nightmare, you are flat out violating comprehensive state privacy laws.
Section 6. The cost of non-compliance. Enforcement penalties.
And this brings us to the climax of our explainer. We know the playbook, but it all boils down to one simple, honestly terrifying question for compliance officers and business owners. What happens if a business breaks to rules? What is the actual financial penalty for failing to provide transparency, or skipping a risk assessment, or suffering a preventable data breach?
And the numbers here brilliantly illustrate the staggering reality. Remember, these aren't just flat fees, we're talking fines per violation. In Connecticut, it's up to $5,000 per willful violation. In California, Utah, and Virginia, penalties can reach $7,500. But Colorado? Wow, violations there are treated as deceptive trade practices, which means a single violation can cost a business up to $20,000. Now multiply that by thousands or hundreds of thousands of consumer records, you can see how incredibly fast this becomes a literal existential threat to a company.
Now, in the early days of these laws, states offered what's known as a cure period. Basically, a 30-day grace window where the Attorney General tells you messed up and lets you fix it before leveling those massive fines. But be warned, that grace is actively disappearing. Actually, California's statutory cure period has already expired. Colorado and Connecticut's are set to sunset by the end of 2024. Really, only Utah and Virginia currently offer a permanent 30-day cure period. The days of getting a friendly warning ticket, they are rapidly coming to an end.
Which leaves us with this massive, looming question to ponder. As compliance costs soar and the 50-state patchwork just keeps expanding, will the pressure finally force a unified federal privacy law, or are businesses just destined to navigate this growing, fragmented maze of state regulations forever? It is a fascinating, high-stakes tug-of-war between state autonomy and federal standardization. Thank you so much for joining this explainer. Keep learning, stay focused, and we'll see you next time.